Today, we're challenging a pretty deeply held assumption in our culture.
Right. The idea that if you want big, monumental results, you need to make some kind of monumental effort.
Exactly. That big, sweeping life overhaul, the sudden burst of willpower that changes everything overnight. We're setting that aside.
And we're going to try and distill an actual operating manual for change, drawing from a pretty big stack of sources on human behavior.
Our mission today is to dig into this counterintuitive insight, which is that remarkable, sustained results really come from the most tiny, almost invisible changes.
And the focus is all on systems, not goals. I think that's the key distinction we'll keep coming back to.
It is.
The forces constantly talk about the atomic habit.
Yeah.
And if you even just look at the word, the etymology of atomic, it means the smallest, most irreducible unit of a larger system.
So not just small actions.
No, not just small. They're fundamental. They're actions that are so small, so easy, that you can do them with absolute consistency.
And consistency is the linchpin here. The math behind this is what really sets the stakes for our deep dive today. It's mind-boggling.
It's exponential.
It's totally exponential. I want you to just think about this for a second. If you can manage to get just 1% better every single day for 1 year,
Just 1%.
the cumulative effect means you will end up 37 times better than where you started.
That's the power of compounding, isn't it?
Nah.
But applied to self-improvement, it forces you to completely reframe how you look at success.
It really does, because we dismiss small changes. I know I do. In the short term, the needle just barely moves.
It feels negligible, useless even. But the sources provide so much evidence that this compounding effect, this continuous layering of tiny changes, is really the engine that drives all long-term explosive success.
And that concept, that systems are the true differentiator, that is what we are here to unpack today. So to really see this compounding effect in action, I think we have to start with it's arguably the most dramatic organizational turnaround in modern sports history.
The transformation of professional cycling in Great Britain.
Yes. For nearly a century, their record was just one of profound failure.
It was more than just failure. It was an international embarrassment.
Yeah.
It was a joke.
Really? That bad?
Oh, yeah. If you look at the historical context, between 1908 and 2008, so a full century, British riders won only a single Olympic gold medal in cycling.
One gold medal in 100 years.
And the biggest race of all, the Tour de France. 0. No British cyclist had ever won it in 110 years.
Wow.
Their reputation was so bad, in fact, that one of the major European bike manufacturers flat out refused to sell them equipment.
You're kidding.
No, they were worried that just associating their brand with British team would actually hurt their sales.
That is the definition of rock bottom.
It is. But then in 2002, British Cycling brought in a new performance director, a man named Dave Brailsford.
And he didn't call for some massive new budget or a huge national campaign?
No, his strategy was deceptively simple. He called it the aggregation of marginal gains.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
He basically believed that if you improved every single thing related to riding a bike by just 1%, all of those tiny gains would accumulate into a massive competitive advantage.
So he was building a system.
He was building a system where success was the inevitable output. He broke down the entire endeavor, training, nutrition, engineering, mindset, everything, and just hunted for these tiny 1% improvements in every single component.
And the sources show this went way beyond the obvious stuff a coach would normally focus on.
Oh, far beyond.
So let's unpack some of these. The expected gains first.
Yeah.
They started with the hardware, right? The bikes.
Naturally. They redesigned the bike seats for, better ergonomic comfort. They started rubbing alcohol on the tires for a stickier grip.
A better grip, okay.
They had the riders wear electrically heated overshorts to maintain the ideal muscle temperature between their warm-up and the actual race start.
That's getting pretty specific.
It is. They used biofeedback sensors to monitor minute responses to training. They even tested different fabrics in a wind tunnel and had the outdoor riders switch to the lighter, more aerodynamic indoor racing suits for major events.
Okay, that all makes a certain kind of sense, high-tech sports stuff. But this is where the philosophy really takes hold, right? When it moves into the overlooked details.
This is where it gets fascinating. They tested different types of massage gels to scientifically figure out which one offered the fastest possible muscle recovery.
Not just what felt good, but what was measurably faster.
Right. And then they hired a surgeon.
Wait, a surgeon? To do what?
To teach the entire team the absolute best way to wash their hands to reduce the chance of catching a cold.
Okay, now that strikes me as wildly excessive. I mean, even for a 1% gain. Aren't you risking over-optimization and losing focus on, actually pedaling the bike?
But that's the classic goal-focused thinking, isn't it? Brailsford's insight was that everything that affects the rider's ability to perform is part of the system. If a single rider gets sick and misses 2 weeks of training right before a big competition, that is a massive loss. It's way more than 1%.
Ah, okay. So spending a tiny amount of time and effort to minimize that risk, even if it means hiring a specialist, is actually an investment in the consistency of the entire system.
You're protecting the system's uptime.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay. That makes sense when you frame it like that. My personal favorite example of this, though, is the pillow.
Yes. They scientifically determined the optimal pillow and mattress for each individual rider to guarantee the best possible night's sleep.
Incredible. And then they painted the inside of the team truck white.
The white truck, this is a great one. They painted it white so the mechanics could more easily spot tiny bits of dust or dirt.
Just dust.
Just dust. Because those tiny particles could otherwise go unnoticed, but they might degrade the performance of the very finely tuned bike components. They were removing friction and potential failure points, even at the microscopic level.
That level of detail is almost obsessive. But you really can't argue with the results, can you?
You can't. Contrast that slow, obsessive start with the explosive success that followed.
It took 5 years for those hundreds of tiny 1% improvements to really stack up.
Right. But once they did, the breakthrough was it was undeniable. At the 2008 Beijing Olympics, the British cycling team completely dominated. They won a staggering 60% of all the available gold medals in the sport.
60%.
Yeah.
And it just accelerated from there.
It did. 4 years later, at the London Olympics, they set 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. And that success on the track started translating to the road, too.
Which was the big prize, the Tour de France.
Exactly. Bradley Wiggins broke that century-long curse. He became the first British cyclist ever to win the Tour in 2012.
And then his teammate, Chris Froome, followed up with 4 more victories in the next 5 years.
5 Tour de France victories in 6 years, after 110 years of total, abject failure.
So the profound lesson here, the one we should really carry through this entire deep dive, is that every team wanted to win the Tour de France. The goal was universal.
The goal was always there. The difference between failure and, well, historic success was the implementation of a system of continuous marginal improvement. The system is the engine. The goal is just the destination.
And that analysis shows this isn't just about cycling, is it? It applies way beyond professional sports to, every facet of our lives.
The sources are very clear on this. Habits are essentially the compound interest of self-improvement.
They're the ultimate double-edged sword.
They cut both ways, relentlessly.
Hmm.
If you design your habits well, time becomes your most powerful ally. It just builds benefits on top of one another exponentially.
But if you let bad habits persist, time becomes your enemy. It slowly erodes your finances, your health, your relationships, until the damage is systemic.
It really is.
So let's start with the positive compounding. Think about, say, productivity at work.
Okay.
Automating one old, time-consuming task, or just mastering a new skill that makes a procedure run a little faster. It might only save you 10 minutes a day.
Which doesn't sound like much.
Right. But it frees up your brain's capacity. The more processes you can handle without active thought, the more mental resources you reclaim, and the more capacity your brain has to focus on higher level, more creative work. And that capacity compounds over time.
Knowledge acquisition is another huge one. Reading one new idea, or even one book, isn't going to transform your life overnight.
Of course not.
But a commitment to lifelong learning is transformative. Because knowledge, it stacks up just like compound interest. Every new piece of information you take in, it opens up new ways of thinking about old ideas.
And it makes it easier to integrate the next piece of knowledge.
You start to see patterns and connections that other people miss because you've built this deeper foundation of understanding.
And this holds true for relationships, too. Being intentionally just slightly nicer or going the extra mile in small interactions.
Like what?
Oh, following up on a minor request really quickly or remembering a small detail about a colleague's family, that compounds into a broad, strong social network over time.
Because people tend to reflect your behavior back to you. So those small acts of kindness create a positive feedback loop that just solidifies trust.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. But we have to spend equal time on the negative side of that blade.
We do. And stress is maybe the most insidious example of negative compounding.
Oh, definitely.
The frustration of daily traffic, that low-grade, persistent weight of financial worry, the unending demands of parenting. Individually, they're just minor irritations.
But when those small, persistent daily stresses go on for years without any release, they compound into serious, measurable, long-term health issues.
Right, from heart disease to chronic inflammation.
And this applies equally to mental stress, to negative thoughts.
Yes, the more you allow those self-critical loops to run, telling yourself you're inadequate or stupid or just prone to failure, the more you condition your brain.
You start to interpret ambiguous life events negatively.
You fulfill the prophecy of your own internalized critique. Time doesn't heal in that case. It just turns minor mental issues into major systemic disorders if those bad habits are left unchecked.
And this leads us to what the sources identify as the most crucial psychological hurdle. It's the primary reason people quit before they ever see results.
The valley of disappointment.
Exactly. There's a fantastic analogy for this using an ice cube that illustrates why progress feels so deceptive at the beginning. Can you walk us through that?
Certainly. Imagine you have an ice cube sitting on a table in a cold room. The temperature is 25 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
Then the room starts to warm up. It hits 28 degrees. Then 30. You're applying heat, that's your effort, but nothing is visibly happening to the ice cube.
And it's frustrating. It feels like all your effort is being completely wasted.
Totally. Then the temperature hits 31 degrees, still nothing visible. But at 32 degrees, the freezing point, the ice finally begins to melt.
And the change is sudden and undeniable. But the key is that breakthrough moment wasn't sudden at all.
Exactly. The breakthrough is the result of all those previous invisible actions that built up the potential required for that major change.
The small efforts were necessary to get the temperature from 25 to 31 degrees, storing energy that was totally invisible until that final breakthrough point.
The sources compare this to the growth of cancer. It spends 80% of its life undetectable before it rapidly takes over the body in just a matter of months. You see the rapid destruction at the end, but you don't see the long, slow period of invisible growth that came before.
And the natural world gives us another perfect example of this with bamboo.
Oh, I love this one.
You plant bamboo, and for the first 5 years, you see barely anything above the ground.
Because it's diligently building this massive, extensive root system underground, completely out of sight.
And then, almost overnight, it explodes 90 feet into the air in just 6 weeks.
And when people see that, they attribute all the success to the final 6 weeks. They completely forget the 5 years of unseen effort that happened beneath the surface.
This is why we have this visual disparity. You can see it in the charts. What you, the learner, think should happen is a straight, linear line of progress. You put in X effort, you get X result.
But what actually happens is an exponential curve that begins with this deep, flat, frustrating valley of disappointment.
And people quit in the valley. They quit because they confuse that slow, invisible progress with total failure.
Right, so mastery, therefore, is just inseparable from radical patience.
There's a famous quote from the social reformer Jacob Riis that the San Antonio Spurs, the pro basketball team, supposedly kept in their locker room. It's about a stonecutter.
The quote describes watching a stonecutter just hammering away at a rock, maybe 100 times, without seeing so much as a crack in it.
100 times? Nothing.
Yet at the 101st blow, the rock splits in two. And the cutter knows, and this is the absolute key insight, that it wasn't the last blow that did it, but all that came before.
That accumulated effort is the system. The 100 blows were the tiny compounding efforts. The final blow was just the moment of transformation. Okay, so now that we understand why small changes matter, this idea of the exponential compounding effect, we need the practical mechanism for how habits actually form in the brain.
Right. How do we take a small action and make sure it sticks and becomes automatic?
And this takes us back to some pretty foundational psychology.
We can start with Edward Thorndike's classic studies with cats in puzzle boxes, way back in the early 1900s.
Puzzle boxes.
Right. These cats were timed trying to figure out how to escape by, say, pulling a cord or pressing a lever, which would open the door and let them get to some food.
And at first, it took them a long time.
Several minutes of just frantic trial and error, sometimes over 2 minutes per trial. But with practice, they got faster and faster at cutting straight to the solution.
And by the last few trials, the escape time dropped to just a few seconds.
Exactly. The cat learned because the successful escape and the reward of the food were satisfying consequences.
And this led to Thorndike's pivotal finding, the law of effect.
which basically states that behaviors followed by satisfying consequences tend to be repeated, and those followed by unpleasant consequences are less likely to be repeated.
Okay, so the law of effect tells us what happens, repetition. But neuroscience tells us how that repetition gets wired into our brains. And that's where dopamine comes in.
Right. The habit is fundamentally a dopamine-driven feedback loop, and dopamine is the key neurotransmitter driving our motivation.
Now, I think the common misconception is that dopamine is the pleasure chemical, that it's all
Right.
about liking something.
And the sources are very clear that that's not quite right. Dopamine drives wanting, not necessarily liking.
That's a critical distinction.
It is. Dopamine is about anticipation and desire. It's the brain's pursuit mechanism. We can see this really clearly in some famous rat experiments.
Okay.
In one study, researchers blocked the dopamine system in rats. They then gave the rats sugar droplets, and the rats' faces showed clear expressions of enjoyment. They still liked the sugar just as much as before. But without the dopamine, they had no motivation, no want to go seek out more sugar. Their desire died, and so all action stopped.
And conversely, if you flood the reward system with dopamine, the action becomes compulsive.
Exactly. When other researchers flooded the system, the desire to act became completely overwhelming. There were mice that received a powerful hit of dopamine each time they poked their nose in a box.
And what happened?
They developed a craving so strong they started poking the box 800 times an hour, just for the anticipation of the hit. The action became totally compulsive because the wanting was so incredibly powerful.
So the brain is really optimized for pursuit.
Biologically, yes.
Yes.
Your brain has significantly more neural circuitry allocated for the wanting of rewards than it does for the liking of them.
That's fascinating.
And since the nucleus accumbens, a key structure in the reward pathway, is nearly 100% active during wanting or craving, but only about 10% of it is activated during the actual experience of liking something.
So this biological reality just explains why craving is such a powerful motivator in that whole habit loop. The brain is primed to pursue cues that lead to potential rewards. So if craving is the core driver, then the first lever we can pull to start a good habit is the cue, the trigger that kicks off the entire loop.
Which brings us to the first law of behavior change. Make it obvious.
But our brains are so good at pattern recognition that we execute most of our habits completely on autopilot. We often don't even see the cue consciously.
That autopilot mode is, well, it's kind of terrifying when you really think about it.
Yeah.
There's a story from the psychologist Gary Klein about a paramedic at a family gathering.
Right.
She looked at her father-in-law, who felt perfectly fine,
Mm.
and just insisted he go to the hospital immediately. Hours later, he was having life-saving surgery for a major arterial blockage.
And the paramedic, she couldn't even articulate why she knew he was in danger.
She couldn't. She had developed non-conscious pattern recognition. After years and years of treating heart failure patients, her brain had learned to recognize a very subtle change in the blood distribution pattern in his face.
A sign that the body was diverting blood away from the surface of the skin toward the critical organs?
Exactly. She knew something was wrong intuitively. It just shows that we perceive cues constantly, even if we can't articulate them. Military analysts do the same thing. They can instantly distinguish an enemy missile from a friendly plane on a radar screen, even when the blips look identical to a novice.
The danger, as you mentioned, is when that powerful conditioning is applied inappropriately, like the anecdote of the retail clerk.
Oh, that's a great example.
She was so conditioned to cut up used gift cards, and then one day, just on complete autopilot, she swiped a customer's actual credit card, picked up the scissors, and just cut the card in half.
The more we repeat these patterns, the less our conscious mind questions them. That's the definition of autopilot.
So if our brain is wired to act automatically based on these non-conscious cues, how on earth do we interrupt the bad patterns or start new good ones? Relying on willpower seems pretty useless here.
Willpower is exactly the wrong tool. The system needs observation, not effort. To counteract that autopilot, we first have to bring our unconscious actions to our conscious awareness.
And that's why the sources recommend a really practical application called the Habit Scorecard.
The habit scorecard is so simple, but it's highly effective. You just take a piece of paper and write down every single behavior you do on a daily basis. Wake up, turn off alarm, check my phone, brush my teeth, weigh myself.
And then you evaluate them.
You mark them as good, plus, bad, or neutral. Just the physical act of writing down check my phone moves that action from the non-conscious automatic domain into the conscious domain.
It's a form of metacognition applied to your daily routine. And this strategy of verbalizing actions has a profound real-world application in the Japanese railway system.
Pointing and calling. It's a remarkable technique they use to drastically reduce errors.
How does it work?
Train operators have to verbally call out signals, speed changes, and other critical actions. They use their eyes to see the signal, their hands to point at it, their mouth to call it out, and their ears to hear themselves say it.
So it's a redundant, multi-sensory process.
And that forces the action to shift from non-conscious to conscious execution, which significantly reduces mistakes. The rule for you, the learner, is simple. If you want to notice a cue, make it sensory and obvious.
And often, the most powerful cues aren't our internal actions, but our external environments. We often fail to realize just how much the architecture of our surroundings dictates our decisions.
Environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior.
And this was demonstrated perfectly in a study by Dr. Ann Thorndike at Massachusetts General Hospital.
She set out to improve the eating habits of thousands of hospital staff and visitors without changing their willpower or requiring any motivation or
You
education.
should just change the choice architecture of a cafeteria.
Exactly. Before her study, the refrigerators right by the cash registers only held soda. She and her team simply added water as an option to every single one of those refrigerators.
And they put baskets of bottled water near the food stations, too.
Right. Soda was still available, but water was now the obvious default choice at every possible point of purchase.
And the behavior just shifted naturally. The environment made the good choice easier and more visible.
In over 3 months, soda sales dropped by 11.4% and bottled water sales increased by 25.8%. Zero change in motivation. Massive change in the outcome.
This environmental influence is why retail works so well. It drives what's called suggestion impulse buying.
We buy things not because we need them, but because their placement just makes them obvious. High-profit, brand-name items are always placed at eye level on the shelf.
And end caps, the units at the end of the aisles, are another prime example. I think something like 45% of Coca-Cola sales come specifically from those end-of-the-aisle racks.
Because they're the most obvious locations with the heaviest foot traffic.
So the takeaway here for you, the listener, is that you have to be the architect of your own environment. I saw this with my own attempt to eat more fruit. I used to buy apples, put them in the dark, hidden refrigerator, crisper drawer.
Where they were effectively invisible.
Exactly. I'd forget them and they'd go bad. But when I moved them to a visible display bowl on the kitchen counter, I started eating 2 or 3 every single day without even thinking about it. Visibility is the strongest possible cue.
So if you want a good habit, make the keys obvious.
Right.
If you want to break a bad habit, make the cues invisible.
Okay, so we've identified the cue. That's law 1. Make it obvious. But what if I see the cue and the action still feels too difficult? Sometimes the friction is just too high.
Right. How do we ensure the action actually happens and gets repeated consistently?
Yeah.
That leads us directly to the third law. Make it easy. To ensure repetition, you have to lower the barrier to entry so drastically that the habit becomes almost frictionless.
And this starts with one of the most counterintuitive paradoxes in mastering a skill. Quantity leads to quality.
The famous University of Florida photography class experiment.
Yes. Jerry Ullsman split his students into 2 groups.
That's right. The first group, the quantity group, was told their grade would be based solely on the amount of work they produced. 100 photos for an A, 90 for a B, and so on.
And the second group.
The quality group. They would be graded only on the excellence of their work. They had to produce just one single perfect photo by the end of the semester.
And the results were, they were decisive.
Completely. All of the truly best photographs came from the quantity group.
And why was that?
Because the quantity group was busy doing the work. They were out there taking photos, experimenting with composition, testing lighting, and learning from hundreds and hundreds of mistakes.
While the quality group, trying to find the optimal, perfect plan, spent all their time speculating and theorizing.
And ultimately produced one mediocre, technically stiff photograph. It's the difference between motion, which is planning, strategizing, theorizing, and action, which is actually doing the reps.
So if you want to master a habit, stop theorizing about the perfect plan and just start acting. The sources even note that repetition is literally a form of physiological change in the brain.
It adapts your neural circuitry. Look at the famous London taxi driver study.
Right?
Drivers who had to navigate the incredibly complex, vast network of London streets for years had a significantly larger hippocampus. That's the region of the brain involved in spatial memory. than non-taxi drivers.
So the regions of the brain adapt as they're used. They strengthen through repetition, just like a muscle responds to weight training.
The more you repeat an action, the more that neural circuit adapts and strengthens, and the easier the habit becomes the next time.
Okay, so if repetition is key and the brain adapts to that repetition, how do we encourage it in the first place?
By appealing to our base nature, the law of least effort, we are wired to be lazy and do what is convenient.
And the sources argue this isn't a flaw in our character, it's an intelligent survival strategy.
Energy is precious. Your brain is wired to conserve it. The law of least effort just states that when you're deciding between two similar options, you will naturally gravitate toward the one that requires the least physical or mental work. The action that gets realized is the one that delivers the most value for the least effort.
We're just motivated to do what's easy, and this preference for ease is so fundamental it can dictate global patterns, too.
Jared Diamond observed this in the spread of agriculture across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
Farming methods and crops spread 2 to 3 times faster across Eurasia, which is an east-west axis, than they did across the Americas and Africa, which are north-south.
Why the difference?
Because traveling east west means you're generally staying within similar latitudes and climates. Farmers could grow the same crops with minimal effort, but moving north-south required domesticating entirely new plants as the climate changed dramatically. The path of least resistance determined the pace of global human development.
That brings us to the ultimate strategy for building habits then, reducing friction. I love the garden hose analogy for this.
It's a great one.
If you want more water to flow from your hose, you have two choices. Either you can crank up the valve relying on willpower and forcing the water through, or you can just walk down the hose and remove the bend.
And cranking up willpower is trying to force water through a bent hose. It requires massive, unsustainable effort. Making the habit easy is like removing the bend and just letting the water flow naturally.
So the goal is to reduce the friction associated with good habits and, conversely, increase the friction associated with bad habits. Addition by subtraction.
And the businesses that thrive today are the ones that have absolutely mastered this reduction of friction.
Absolutely. Japanese manufacturing firms perfected lean production by relentlessly looking to remove waste down to redesigning assembly line workspaces so workers didn't waste time twisting and turning to reach their tools.
And that systematic removal of wasted effort, of friction, resulted in greater efficiency and dramatically better quality products. I think in 1974, American-made color TVs had 5 times as many service calls as Japanese TVs.
Wow.
And that was largely due to better production systems that reduced error-inducing friction.
And look at all the modern services we use every day. Meal delivery reduces the friction of grocery shopping and cooking.
Dating apps reduce the friction of introductions.
Ride-sharing reduces the friction of getting across town. Text messaging reduces the friction of sending a letter. Successful companies are just winning the endless quest to deliver the same result in an easier fashion.
Even highly bureaucratic organizations can leverage this. The British government wanted to increase its tax response rate.
Okay.
They stopped sending citizens to a generic web page where the tax form had to be manually downloaded and then filled out. Instead, they just linked directly to the specific form required.
So they removed one step.
Just one step, that tiny piece of friction. And it increased the response rate from 19.2% to 23.4%. That represents millions in newly collected tax revenue.
That is profound. Reducing one click resulted in millions of pounds. So for our daily lives, the goal is to prime the environment for future use.
Exactly. I love the concept of resetting the room, which was employed by an IT developer named Oswald Knuckles. His goal isn't just to clean up after the last action, but to prepare for the next action.
He's proactively lazy.
He is. He places the TV remote back on the stand, arranges the pillows, and folds the blanket as soon as he finishes watching TV. So the next time he sits down, the environment is ready for enjoyment. He throws trash away the moment he leaves his car. He even cleans the toilet while the shower is warming up.
By organizing a space for its intended purpose, he makes the next good action easy and the bad action, living in clutter, much harder.
If you want to practice guitar, don't keep it locked away in a closet. Put it on a stand in the middle of your living room with the sheet music open.
If you want to work out in the morning, sleep in your workout clothes. Reduce the friction to 0 to make the right choice the easiest possible choice. So we've identified the cue. Law 1, make it obvious. And we've ensured the action is performed with minimal effort. Law 3, make it easy. But for a behavior to be repeated consistently over years, to truly stick,
it has to fulfill the cardinal rule of behavior change. Behaviors are only repeated if they are satisfying.
And here's where we run into the inherent conflict of modern life. We live in a world that's defined by a delayed return environment.
Right. We work for 40 years to save for retirement. We study for years to get a degree. We wait for months to see the results of a new diet.
But our brains evolved in an immediate return environment. Our ancestors were focused on securing the next meal or fleeing an immediate threat.
We are wired to prefer quick payoff over long-term ones, even if they sabotage our future selves. It's called time inconsistency.
And since good habits saving money, losing weight, learning a language often pay off in the distant future, they lack that immediate, tangible satisfaction.
Which makes them incredibly hard to repeat. So to bridge that gap, we have to find a way to make the delayed habit immediately satisfying. We need to manufacture an immediate reward that reinforces the desired behavior.
The story of the Karachi hand-washing crisis illustrates this perfectly. In the late 1990s, the city of Karachi, Pakistan, was struggling with widespread illness from unsanitary conditions.
And a public health worker named Stephen Luby and his team realized that hand washing was the simplest, cheapest solution. But the residents already knew that.
They knew they should wash their hands, they just didn't do it consistently.
So Luby and his team didn't lecture them. They didn't use fear tactics. They simply introduced Safeguard soap, a product that foamed up really easily, smelled great, and left a pleasant feeling on your hands.
So the hand-washing habit stuck because the soap provided an immediate, positive sensory signal of pleasure. The rich lather, the clean scent, that feeling of smoothness.
That immediate positive feedback was the reinforcing reward that was needed to make the behavior satisfying.
And the results were stunning. Within months, the rate of diarrhea dropped by 52%. And critically, the high adoption rate of the new soap was sustained years later.
The effectiveness of the cleaning was delayed, but the feeling of cleanliness was immediate.
This is the genius behind so many mass-market consumer products. William Wrigley revolutionized chewing gum, not by selling it as a breath mint, but by adding flavors like spearmint and juicy fruit and promoting it as a pathway to a clean mouthfeel.
And toothpaste manufacturers found success by adding strong mint flavors. Those flavors don't actually increase cleaning effectiveness, but they provide that immediate, palpable, pleasurable sensory feedback that locks the habit in place.
Okay, but what if the habit is an avoidance habit? How do you make no frivolous purchases satisfying? You're actively doing nothing, which is inherently unsatisfying in the short term.
You have to make the avoidance visible. The solution is to create a visualization of the money you're saving by skipping the bad habit.
So you open a savings account, digital or physical, and you label it for something you really want. A new guitar or a leather jacket.
And if you sip your morning latte, you immediately transfer that saved $5 into the new guitar account. This provides an immediate visual reward of seeing the money accumulate, and that makes the deprivation feel satisfying.
You're trading a small, fleeting, immediate payoff, the latte, for a larger immediate payoff, which is visible progress toward your long-term goal.
This principle of visual measurement is so powerful. It's the core of what's called the Paperclip strategy.
Right. In 1993, a stockbroker named Trent Dearsmead started each morning with 2 jars. One was filled with 120 paperclips.
And his only goal was to make sales calls until that first jar was empty.
After every single sales call, he moved 1 clip to the empty jar. That tangible visual measure reinforced the behavior and gave him immediate satisfaction.
He wasn't focused on the commission check that would arrive in a month. He was focused on the immediate satisfaction of moving that clip. And within 18 months of starting that system, he was bringing in $5 million to his firm.
This kind of tracking, like Jerry Seinfeld's famous "don't break the chain" strategy for writing jokes, it's powerful because it leverages multiple laws at the same time.
It makes the behavior obvious because the chain is visible. It makes it attractive by seeing the streak grow. And most importantly, it makes it satisfying by providing visible proof of progress.
But habit tracking, it's essential, but we have to introduce a serious note of caution here to maintain a balanced perspective.
Goodhart's law.
Yes, which states, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
This means we often optimize intensely for the measurement itself, even if that measurement is flawed or incomplete. The sources give the example of a restaurant that measures its success only by its daily revenue.
The real goal is customer satisfaction and delicious food, but the metric they're tracking is money.
Just because a customer pays doesn't mean they enjoyed the meal. By focusing only on revenue, you might accidentally neglect the quality of the food or the friendliness of the service, which are harder to quantify, but essential to the long-term success of the business.
We optimize for the numbers we track, so we have to choose the right metrics. If we only focus on getting 10,000 steps, which is the measure, instead of genuinely being healthy, which is the target, we're missing the big picture.
So tracking is extremely useful, but you have to ensure your metric is capturing the spirit of the goal, not just an easy-to-quantify proxy. The metric should guide you, not consume you.
So we've covered the 4 laws for building a really robust system. But for those who are seeking truly remarkable results to really maximize those 1% gains, there's an advanced tactic.
And that's understanding where your natural strengths fit. The sources remind us that our genes predispose us, but they do not predetermine us. Success often hinges on matching your inherent talents to the right environment.
You can see this immediately when you contrast 2 world-class athletes. Let's take Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps and the distance runner Hicham El Guerrouj.
Okay. Phelps, at 6'4" and 194 pounds, he has a long torso and relatively short legs. That's the perfect build for minimal drag and maximum pulling power through the water.
And El Guerrouj's a champion distance runner. He's 5'9" and 138 pounds with incredibly long legs and a short upper body. It's an ideal frame for efficiency in running.
And despite their massive height difference, they wear the same length pant inseam.
That's amazing. Now imagine the disaster if they switched sports.
Phelps, being 40% heavier than El Guerrouj, would be doomed to failure as a distance runner. And El Guerrouj, lacking the height, the arm span, and that long back of an elite swimmer, would be at a severe disadvantage in the pool.
Both of them maximized their success because they found the environment that complemented their specific natural advantages.
And this isn't just physical. Your genetic makeup influences your core personality traits, the big 5. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
And these traits, which have biological underpinnings, influence which habits feel natural and satisfying to you.
Right. Take extroversion. It's partially determined by how our nervous system reacts to stimuli. Babies who turn toward a loud noise are more likely to grow up to be extroverts, while those who turn away tend toward introversion.
And someone high in agreeableness might have higher natural oxytocin levels,
Making habits like writing thank you notes or organizing social events feel more intuitive and satisfying to them.
and conversely, neuroticism, which is linked to the hypersensitivity of the amygdala, makes certain people more sensitive to negative cues and threats in their environment.
The point is, our personality preferences make certain behaviors inherently easier and others harder. You want to choose the habits that match your natural wiring, because that reduces the internal friction.
Since life is too short to try every single possibility, the sources suggest we employ what's called the explore-exploit trade-off.
When you begin a new activity or a career, you should first focus on exploration, trying many different possibilities like sampling different fields of study or dating different types of people. That's the search phase.
And once you've identified the areas where you seem to get disproportionate returns, where you're naturally stronger or more interested, you shift your focus to exploit the best solution you found.
You stop exploring so widely and you start committing deeply to the system that works for you.
The sources outline 4 key questions that can help you narrow down your natural fit, leading you to habits that are inherently satisfying and sustainable. First, what feels like fun to me, but work to others?
This is the work that hurts you less than it hurts other people, which means you'll persist when they quit in that valley of disappointment.
Second, what makes me lose track of time?
The flow state. That blend of happiness and peak performance, it's nearly impossible to enter a flow state and not find the task satisfying to some degree, which guarantees intrinsic motivation.
Third, where do I get greater returns than the average person?
When you see results coming faster for you than for your colleagues, that external validation and comparison reinforces the behavior and motivates you to keep going. It validates the system you've built.
And fourth, and maybe most important, what comes naturally to me?
This requires ignoring external expectations and just asking yourself, when have I felt authentic and genuine? When have I felt alive? Following that feeling of natural engagement directs you toward the most sustainable habits, regardless of what the external world tells you you should be doing.
And finally, if you can't find a game where the odds are stacked in your favor, you don't just give up, you create a new game.
This is the art of winning by being different, rather than trying to be better in a predetermined field.
The creator of the cartoon Dilbert, Scott Adams, is the perfect example of this principle. He was always honest in admitting he wasn't the best artist, nor was he the funniest stand-up comedian.
But he didn't need to be the best at either one. The combination of drawing well, being funnier than most people, and having a deep business background from working in the corporate world, that made his specific combination of skills rare and powerful.
Few cartoonists could understand the nuances and frustrations of the corporate cubicle worker without having lived it themselves.
By combining 2 or 3 average skills into a unique skill stack, you reduce the level of competition to almost zero. You shortcut the need for a massive individual genetic advantage by rewriting the rules of the game to favor your unique combined set of talents. You find the environment that favors your inherent structure.
So this deep dive has really shown us that the path to remarkable, transformative results, it's not paved with heroic acts of sudden willpower.
No, it's paved with a long, consistent series of small wins and tiny breakthroughs.
And those wins are reinforced by intentionally designing systems that make good habits obvious, easy, and immediately satisfying.
You know, the ultimate advanced state of habit awareness is really observation without craving. It's the realization that you don't need to fix anything, you don't need to crave a change in your state.
Yeah.
You're simply observing the cue and choosing the right action effortlessly.
So craving is about wanting to fix everything.
Exactly. But when your desires aren't running rampant, your mind doesn't generate a problem for you to solve. And that really is true peace, where the system just runs itself.
That's a powerful final thought on self-mastery. But let's bring it back to the practical systems we've talked about today. For you, the listener, who is aiming for a difficult long-term goal, a goal that currently resides deep in that valley of disappointment, I want you to consider the law of least effort. What single small piece of friction can you remove today to make the right choice the easiest possible choice?
Because that tiny adjustment might just be the 1% improvement that compounds to make you 37 times better by the end of the year.